welcome to everyone that's joining us. There's more people to admit from the waiting room, so we'll just take a moment or two to do that, and then once we're all gathered, we'll make a start more formally. But it's great to have you here. My colleague Ben is going to be posting information in the chat that will be of use during the session, so do get the chat open and have a look at what's appearing there. Okay, looks so we got everyone in initially. So a very warm welcome to Jesus is Just All Right. It's tremendous to have you with us for this first session in this four-part series. The session is part of Living God's Future Now, the online festival of theology, ideas and practice from Heart Edge. And Heart Edge itself is an international and ecumenical movement for renewal within the broad church. We're a network of churches growing compassionate responses to needs, cultural and commercial activities and congregational life. And we'll be posting more information about Heart Edge and Living God's Future Now events in the chat towards the end of the session. Now, as I said, this is the first in a four-part series. For over 50 years, pop musicians in all genres have explored the meaning and significance of Jesus in their music, and the result is a rich collection of songs that consider important spiritual questions like faith, doubt, and prayer in unique and often provocative ways. So our contention with these series is that by exploring what these different songs say about the ways modern Christians have imagined Jesus, we will be challenged to consider how our own assumptions affect the way that we relate to him. And the person who's put this series together and who's going to be leading us through the session today is Delvin Case, a composer, a conductor, a scholar, performer, concert producer, and educator. Delvin's a good friend of Heart Edge. We're very pleased to have him with us today, and I'm now going to hand over to Delvin to lead us through the rest of the session. Thank you, Delvin.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thanks everyone for coming. It's nice to see some familiar faces and folks that I know. I hope that all of you will enjoy this opportunity. This is a four-part series, but you certainly don't have to go to everything. I mean, your grade will be affected if you don't come to each session. I do take attendance, but apart from that, happy to see you whenever you choose to come over the next few Fridays. So if you're here, you've already made it over the sort of the first challenge for this kind of project, which is the event, which is that the basic idea that we can learn about our faith and even about Jesus by music that maybe isn't intended to be used in the church, which is kind of weird because when we think about religious music or sacred music, we tend to think of music used in the liturgy or oftentimes music that's more classically oriented, like an oratorio or a mass setting. Also, if you're an American, you probably know about contemporary Christian pop music or worship music. Think about Hillsong from Australia, or certainly gospel music. There's a lot of music that's been created, whether it's classical or non-classical, to serve the body of Christ, to serve people who are worshiping God in a worship service, whether with a praise band or a choir, or on the radio. Essentially, these Christian pop song or Christian worship songs or gospel songs are used in church, but they're on the radio, at least in much of America, and you can listen to them as almost like a devotional practice. And that's an incredibly complex and rich collection of musical interpretations of our faith. But over the last 50 years, there's been sort of a weird and unique and very interestingly powerful phenomenon that's developed, and that is the creation of songs about our faith, but not intended for use by Christians. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about songs today in the next 3 Fridays that have been created by artists in various popular genres: hip hop, country, rock, punk, folk, etc. And though they engage with and interrogate and explore questions of faith and meaning, they don't do so really for people in the pews. When you're a hip hop artist or a punk singer, you write songs to get rich and famous, sell a lot of records, and make your entertain your fans, express your artistry. And artists oftentimes engage with really deep questions of meaning and existence, at least in pop music ever since the 60s, when questions of consciousness and spirituality started to become really important in progressive rock and psychedelic rock. And ever since then, musicians in the pop world many of them have explored these deep questions. So it makes sense that if you're trying to figure out the meaning of life through your music, if you write the occasional song that asks the question, well, what's it all about? Or if you have some political ideology to sing about, like if you're a rapper or a punk artist, probably Jesus, or at least the Christian tradition, is going to show up, because this is the center in the Western culture of sort of these. It's the planet around which these questions tend to orbit. So what we have is 50 years of songs that are asking really interesting questions about Christianity, and oftentimes they do so by focusing on the person of Jesus. Since Jesus was, whatever you think about him theologically, he was at the very least a character that's central in Western culture, and also someone that people tend to sort of have some kind of relationship to, even by imagining the way he looks in a painting or in a film or in Jesus Christ Superstar, or in a piece of devotional art. So Jesus was a guy, a person that we all sort of imagine, and we can sort of, if we pray, oftentimes we might envision him, but even if we don't, Jesus is a character in Western culture. So you put all this together, and we have all these songs that are trying to ask deep questions about spirituality and meaning and faith, but they're not doing so in a way that is sort of controlled or beholden to any kind of religious tradition. And what fascinates me about this, and what I think makes these so uniquely powerful, is that's because these songs are unencumbered by the church or people in the pews' opinions. They can really be open and honest, and they can ask the tough questions. They can challenge Jesus in the ways that, or God in ways that, frankly, a lot of the powerful Psalms do. Where are you, God? And so we see a really rich collection of ways of understanding God, and a real willingness and a courage to ask questions about God and faith, but also who Jesus was. Because really our faith stands and falls by, or our faith is based on our response to our understanding of who Jesus is. Now, in today's session, we're going to look at songs that are that imagine Jesus in what I call an incarnation, that is, that present Jesus in usually a contemporary form, comparing or contrasting or imagining him, using some representative image or stereotype. The famous song that you might know is the country song from the 70s, "Drop Kick Me Jesus Through the Goalposts of Life." Now, this is imagining Jesus Christ, the Savior of mankind, as an American football player, right? And salvation as a field goal, right? And now it's a great, it's a funny theological idea, but it's pretty orthodox. The song goes on and says, "Neither to the left or to the right, straight through the middle of your holy uprights," right? "Drop kick me, Jesus, through the goalposts of life." So yes, Jesus is a savior. At the same time, imagining Jesus as an American football player is a really interesting way to think about the eternal Son of God, the second person of the Trinity. And that tells us a lot about who we are as humans and as Christians, how we want to engage with Jesus and talk to him. So for today, we're going to be listening. We're going to have three little moments where we're going to listen to two songs about Jesus that present him in these particular incarnations, these modern incarnations. And then we're going to go into small breakout groups where we discuss a few questions. We'll repeat that a couple times, and then we'll come back to sort of a plenary session where we sort of share some of our thoughts. I've made a website that I think is in the chat, and this is something you can go to listen and look at the lyrics of these songs. Now, as we listen to these songs and as we discuss, I've come up with 4 questions. Now, each of these could take hours to discuss, but they're ones I think would be helpful for us to think about. And they will help orient us towards a hearing of this music as a resource for faith formation. That basically, it's interesting and silly to think about Jesus as a football player. But for me, what's more interesting is what we get from these, how we can use these songs as a means of exploring our own faith. So here are the questions. So as you listen to each set of songs, the first one is simple. What are the attributes or personal characteristics of Jesus that appear in this song? What values do those represent? And this is interesting because we're not just looking at lyrics, this is music. So we need to listen for the mood or the emotion of the music. Because a song can be very sort of pro-Jesus in its lyrics, but it can be very angry sounding in its music, and that's really important. So the second question is, as I say here, there's an old saying that God created us in his image, and then we return the favor. Is this happening in this song? How does the depiction of Jesus in this song reflect its genre, or its intended audience, or the artist's background or community? For example, we're going to listen to a very powerful song by the hip hop genius Tupac Shakur called Black Jesus. And this song is going to answer these questions, number 1 and 2. What does it mean to imagine Jesus as a Black urban man in America, for example, and why does Jesus need to be imagined that way? The third and the fourth are a little more personal. It's what is your personal response to the Jesus depicted in this song? Maybe you're offended, hopefully not. Maybe you're just amused. Do you agree with the artist's description or depiction? What would you add, remove, or change about the song to make it more closely reflect the way you think about Jesus? And then this gets us to number 4, which is the real question, right? What do you think about Jesus? What are the assumptions you have about who Jesus is, what his values are, and how does that affect your own life? So for example, if like a folk song singer, you think of Jesus as a political revolutionary, as a Marxist who will overthrow society and work on the behalf of poor people, right? Again, that reflects your own vision of who Jesus is, right? And you're going to think of Jesus as someone that you follow and as a political figure. But that's a very different Jesus than the Jesus who's an American football player, who seems to exist as a buddy of yours who helps you get into heaven. And we all do this. Now, I know that's a lot to throw at everybody, but now that's everything. We've got all the questions, you've got the background, and now it's time to listen to the music. Now, if you're interested in this project in general, you can go to the website, the main website for this project, which has lots of information, has playlists and a database, and you can explore lots of songs about Jesus. And from this research in this website, I developed this collection. So here's how it goes. The first 2 songs we're going to check out are a country song, Jesus Was a Country Boy by Clay Walker. And the second is by the American rock star Scott Stapp, who was actually part of a Christian rock band that ended up going secular. And this is like a secular song, which is unapologetic about its sort of religious nature. So again, most of these songs are by practicing Christians, but they're not intended just or only or specifically for Christians. And they, as a result, they're quite interesting. All right, so now we're going to listen. We'll listen together. I'll scroll through the lyrics because we're not going to focus on the videos now. And then we'll break into groups and you'll have your chance to explore just some of these questions. And Jonathan and I think Ben, we may be popping into various of the sessions as well, the discussion breakout groups. So unless there are any questions, we can get started. So the song continues and there's no real difference in the lyrics. And so what we're going to do now is we'll listen to the Scott Stapp song, and then we'll break into our groups. Okay, so 2 very different but interestingly similar images of Jesus. So why don't we break into our groups for until about I guess it'll be noon here in the US and 5 in the UK, just to talk through some of these responses. And you don't have to follow the questions per se. We're just going to keep on rolling through, if that makes sense. Okay. I think we're probably all back. Yeah, so those are two different ways to imagine Jesus. I think in our group we talked a lot about how the country musician imagines Jesus like a country boy, and the rock star imagines Jesus like a rock singer. For me, before we move on, we started with question 3, like, do you have a particular response to a strong response to either of these songs? And like, I didn't get a chance to share this, but I really don't like the rock one because the music is so powerful. And like, I feel like that's a song that's about like the eternal Christ, the judge, the one in Revelation, the guy who comes with the sword in his mouth, but I think that the Jesus the Country Boy, the music helps me imagine Jesus more humbly, more like the human part, and I feel like he was the one who probably, he gained followers more through his stories, right, than yelling at them. Though, certainly did yell at people in the Bible. But the great thing about these songs is they're not going anywhere. So if you're drawn to either of them and you want to listen again and chew on them, you certainly can. So we're going to move on, and we're going to listen to 2 other songs. And these So now we're going to break into groups and have a time to chat about those. Let's see. It's about. Why don't we plan to return at? Let's plan to return at 20 past the hour, Ben, if that's okay. Okay, hello everybody. Such provocative songs, and especially man, there's a lot to talk about with both of those songs. But there are I found at least 500 of these Jesus songs over the last 50 years. So if you go to the website that's listed on the in the chat, I'm not sure if there's a link to it from the website. You can actually search for songs about Jesus in which Jesus is presented as a soldier, right? You can actually search for other country songs about Jesus. You can search for, again, there's a database in there that will allow you to find other ways that Jesus is imagined and depicted. So we'll finish up with one more set, and I think I get the sense that there's a lot to say. So why don't we try this? Why don't we? The next 2 songs are comparatively short. And so we'll get started and listen to those, and then we'll have a chance at the end of the session to have a sort of a more group conversation. So So why don't we break into groups? We'll come back in. Let's do this. Let's come back in let's spend about 15 minutes in our break groups so we can chew on these things, and then we'll come back for a final sort of group discussion. Hello, friends. Nice to see you, and thank you so much for joining. And hopefully, I've had some great conversations with in a bunch of groups. And we could probably talk about any one of these songs for a whole hour and a half. And luckily, they're not going anywhere. But now is our time to spend a little bit of time together, and maybe just raise some of the questions, just as a larger group. And there's no real agenda here, but I might go back to the questions I've listed here. It's tempting to ask the question to focus on, sorry, make this a little bit smaller so we can see it. For me, number 3 is the interesting one. It's the easiest one. Like, what is my response? Which song was my favorite? Which songs do I dislike? How does that relate to my image of Jesus? So to be honest, I'd love to focus on the last one. Because whatever we think about these songs, I personally believe that we all do this. We all imagine Jesus in a certain way, and that affects our faith and how we live. So I don't know if that's valuable, but I wonder if we could maybe organize this plenary discussion around number 4. If anybody wants to respond to this either personally or speaking on behalf of your church, your community, or your country, it's a lot to say, right? But really the floor is basically open. So maybe I'll just keep this on the screen, but I think that sort of the agenda is open for anybody who might want to say anything.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to say something.
Right.
I think, when it comes to Jesus, that Jesus is going to be in the likeness of the person who's, viewing Jesus. And that's the universality of Jesus. So with the exception of the last song, which I think was confused, I have to say that because it's a historical fact that, that didn't do what Jesus was doing. So I have to disagree with that particular formulation as Jesus as Hitler. But when you think about Jesus, Jesus is going to reflect the person who's partaking of Jesus. And in that sense, Jesus is in all of us. Well, I also must say he's even in the person who thought he was a Nazi.
Hi, Delvin. This is Jeff Box from Bonita Springs, Florida. My overall thought in terms of just the characteristic or attribute to address question 4, the thing I think, and I brought this up in our groups, that we hear the most in this is Jesus is very human and very much like me, which I find both, I think, enriching and challenging. And it's obviously not a new discussion, how much of Jesus of him is human, how much of him is God. And of course, we come to a realization that Jesus is fully human and fully God, and that's a difficult thing to really grasp. But these songs seem to gravitate towards, Jesus is a human, he's like me. And the challenging part of that is, of course, as one who works in a church, my goal is not for Jesus to become like me, but for me to become like Jesus, in terms of spiritual formation. So I think the songs bring that natural tendency to make God like us. Very much how you opened this, with the question of, God made us in our image, and now we've returned the favor. And I think these songs certainly reflect that.
And Jeff, if I could put you on the spot for a second, because you're a music director, I mean, every you're choosing anthems or choruses about Jesus to a certain extent, or God. Like, how does this fit into your choosing of the music?
Well, so I look at all of these lyrics very critically, which is what I do. Because honestly, it's not so much about the music first, it's the lyrics first. And if the lyrics get up past me, then we'll talk about the music. So in a couple of these, the whole idea of an equal 1-to-1 comparison of Jesus to a soldier was a tough one. That would be a difficult discussion to have. There was another one that struck me, where, if I can find it quickly, is I think the first song. Oh yeah, and I never doubted he'd make it to heaven, because it ain't who you are, it's who you know. And there's I think some truth to that statement, although my impression was that the lyricist was basically saying my father piggybacked on my mother's faith into heaven. And so I wondered about that. But then Julie in my group brought up 1 Corinthians 7:14, which says, for the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife. And so I was like, oh, well, all right then. So it was kind of funny how thanks to Julie, I was able to think, well, I would immediately reject that as just not being something we would sing in church, because it doesn't represent a truth. But at least it certainly gave me something to ponder and to think about. And so I say that to say that sometimes we do that in church. We give them something that we want to give them material that is challenging and makes them think differently about their faith than they do when they walk in the door. And so that occurred here, and not that I would use that song in a worship context, but it reminded me that it's important to use music and to use any part of liturgy to not just affirm a belief of someone that walks through the door, but for that belief or that their understanding of God to be bigger than it was when they started.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of the sessions, I think it might be the last one, is about songs that are prophetic, that explore, challenge Christians to re-understand or to defend their faith from a perspective outside of it, right? And so you don't find a lot of songs like that used in church, but we all need to be doing that all the time, right? Refining the refiner's fire, right? In this sense, making sure that we're living that Christ-like life. And sometimes we have to look to outsiders as a mirror on ourselves. And if you stick around for a couple of weeks, there's going to be some really powerful songs there.
You know, that's something that came out of our group. This idea of all these songs being limiting, you know, because when we tried to choose like, oh, which song are we going to be humming later? And it's like, oh, it became, well, which one is closest? You know, like nothing was quite like, these were all pretty like very direct, like right on the money kind of songs. And it reminded me that you know, so my husband comes from a Jewish Catholic background and is not Christian, but when he listens to contemporary worship music, he will often say that they feel very like simplistic and limiting, like because it's just a very just kind of straight ahead, you know, kind of version of faith and Jesus, and because he doesn't share that, it's not something that connects with him because it doesn't kind of capture the whole of, you know, kind of a spiritual experience. And so I found myself thinking about that a lot as I was kind of put in an opposite position of listening to these songs, kind of try to describe Jesus from this other perspective that felt very limiting, like, oh, like this doesn't feel quite right. And so I just remembering kind of how worship songs sound to folks that aren't kind of in, you know, and then how songs that kind of capture a more nuanced take can reach folks is something I've been sitting in a lot in my marriage. And so that's why I was excited to hop on these calls, because it's conversations that I've been having with folks outside the church. So.
I think that's one of the things about the conversations that we've been having in our breakout groups is that, you know, they've been great conversations on the back of these songs. You know, because the songs are expressing responses to Christ in ways that wouldn't be so traditional within a church context, it does make it, you know, they do have the potential to open up conversations in different directions. And clearly, you know, they're songs that will connect with people who are outside the church, and therefore maybe a kind of a bridge to having those conversations, you know, about Christ.
Yeah, a lot of these songs, or not a lot of them, but a few of them ask questions, you know, deliberately ask questions, like Jesus Hitler asks questions. And to a certain extent, Black Jesus also asks questions, maybe not literally, but it provokes a response. It opens up the terrain for conversation. And that's not something which a lot of like hymns tend to do, even though they might be rich. And that's not a thing that a lot of these songs do. Like Jesus was a country boy. He's telling you what I think. Jesus was a rock star, right? For me, anybody who's clearly ideological and says this is the way it is, that's for me, or I gotta be careful, right? Pop songs are short, you know, and so they sort of only have room for one thing. So it's kind of unfair. But I think that's why for me, Black Jesus is so powerful, because it's so dense and so rich. And it does more than most songs do. You know, it sounds more like a parable, you know, where it opens up, it tells these stories and then says, go do it with it what you will. Are there any last comments or thoughts before we end the session?
I guess maybe one thought is that in the process of critiquing these pop songs, maybe it's also worth to critique the songs that we do sing in a Christian or church context. And I think some of the descriptions that we applied just now, like limiting or like one-dimensional, they also certainly apply to some songs that you might call, say, contemporary Christian music or contemporary Christian pop, or like, you know, any song is that we might use in a, say, liturgical context. And, you know, if we're really honest about it, the Bible is super challenging, right? We don't, you know, it's not that we have to find outside concepts in order to challenge us. The Bible itself already challenges us so much. Otherwise, if it were so easy, then all of us would be exactly like Christ. So we don't sing enough, say, laments, or we don't sing enough, like songs that look at our own sinfulness, or how we're like a prostitute, or things like these, which are described in the Bible. And maybe it's worth thinking about, like, what is actually in our liturgies and in our worship collections.
Yeah, and the Bible's full of different genres too.
I see. I'm an evangelist normally out on the streets, but it really works if like some pop artist has a song about Jesus, to connect, because if they're a fan of this pop artist, yeah, it's just easier. Then they're interested.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems like not all of these secular songs about Jesus are written by seekers or non-Christian. A lot of them are written by Christians, but even those songs, since they know their audience is not necessarily Christian, there is an openness, right? There's an entrance into it, which I think is more attractive to when you say, here, this is a church song. Though songs like "Beer with Jesus Was a Rock Star," or even "Jesus Was a Country Boy," they have a very clear idea of who Jesus is, which can be attractive, but it also can be off-putting in a way. So next time we have, yes, first of all, don't forget, Jonathan has a great book on this topic, on pop music and faith. You should check out, and it's in the chat. He's also put, Ben has also put in the chat the different sessions. So next week is looking at this, a collection of songs that imagine if Jesus came back today. And there's a whole bunch of them. Jesus is imagined as a judge, or an apocalyptic judge, in a fair number of pop songs. And it's really interesting to see, especially what even non-Christians think, how they marshal Jesus, and they say, hey, here's your Jesus, you think he's so great. Well, if he came back today, here's what he would say about you folks. Sometimes that gets right to you. So that's really powerful. And if you're interested in checking this out, if you go to the website that, again, I'll share my screen, but if you go to the site for this session and click here, you're taken to a website that actually, do I not have an actual link? I'll add the link, which has a whole category of songs in which Jesus is imagined as a judge. It's got a playlist, so you can actually check out all these songs in advance and many more. And that's next time. So I hope to see you back and bring friends. Jonathan, I don't know if you wanted to finish up, or Ben, if you.
Yeah. So much thanks to Delvin for leading us through, and for his selection of provocative songs that have made us think, and led to some great conversations. So as Delvin says, do come back next week for the next in this 4-part series. Ben has also dropped into the chat details of other Heart Edge events that are coming up. There's always a lot in the program, and a lot that's of real interest, and that will cause debate and much provoking of thought. So do have a look at those, including the next Thursday, the next in our series of Living God's Future Now conversations between Sam Wells and a leading theologian or practitioner. This week, this month, it's Lucy Winkett, the rector of St James Piccadilly. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for what you've contributed into the mix and shared. And we look forward to seeing you next time. So thanks for being with us, and see you again soon. All the best.